and it's been a lot of fun to do that over the last 2 years. And Hugh was one of the people who kind of got us going. And so it's been a delight to get to know him better and learn all that he has to offer. It's really been a great pleasure. And so I don't know where to start, except that you came to the island in 1976.
Yes.
And
This island.
This island. And there were other, he was at Sand Island before that, and that's going to be the focus here, but I don't want to take that away from you, because the punchline is pretty cool. And as an organization, we've been, we held a big lecture at the museum, and we're very excited that almost 100 people showed up. And so we've had a lot of fun this summer. We thought it'd be fun to tap into the knowledge that we all have. There are a lot of people who have done interesting things on this island, right? And so we thought it'd be fun to have some informal gatherings where people talk about something that they know something about and share their knowledge. So this is our first experiment, and I was going to host it at my house because I thought a few people would show up, but my house wouldn't hold 20-some people, so we changed it to Pixie and Jay's, and thank them for that very much.
Our pleasure.
And with that, I think I'll just let Hugh tell us his story about Sand Island. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Linda.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Pixie, and thanks, Jay. Well, I didn't think I would be talking to this big a group. My coming to Sand Island was in 1939. I was 8 years old. And the reason I remember so much about Sand Island is that it was so different from my home back in Bayport, Minnesota. Why? Because you get off the boat, you go up the steps, and there's 3 cabins that date way back in history. Fred Anderson now has purchased that because he was a friend of a lot of the Hudson, Wisconsin people who owned the cabins on the south shore of Sand Island. How many have been to Sand Island? Ah, good. And I don't have to tell you how to get there. Anyway, I remember that trip, the first trip, and we made it 2 more times before the war, and of course when the war came along there was no more trips to Sand Island. But why I remember it is that number 1, we drank out of the lake.
Wow.
So now we're drinking out of a faucet at home. Number 2, we couldn't throw a switch for lights. We had 2 types of lanterns. We had the good old-fashioned, and we had candles, and we had a good old-fashioned oil lamp, but we had the Aladdin lamp. How many people are familiar with the Aladdin lamp? It is an oil lamp. You are, yes. It's an oil lamp with a round wick, and on top of that wick is a mantle, like those gas lights you get for camping. All right, if you keep that wick nice and trim, those mantles will light up like a 100-watt light bulb. So we had those for the people who wanted to play bridge and other cards. And the other thing, we had an outhouse. I hadn't gone to an outhouse until I went to Sand Island. And let's see, what else did we do different? Oh, our food was from our neighbor who fed us 2 meals a day. Down in the southeast corner of Sand Island was the first resident of Sand Island in 1870, and his son-in-law is Bert Hill. I think some of you might have heard that name because there was a boat in the marina called Bert Hill. Bert was a farmer, a fisherman, a lumberman. He did everything, and he took care of those cabins when people were not there. The Phippses from Hudson, the Andersons from Bayport, and then the Yenshins. I don't know if you know that name. That was an old island name. Anyway, we show up, and there we are introduced to pretty primitive conditions. But with my buddy that was with me, we swam and we got around the island, and then one day we took a walk to the schoolhouse. There was a school on Sand Island. there was 27 kids in that school at one time. And it was closed down like in 1927, and yet when we went over there, there's still books in the desk. No one had ransacked them, no one had messed it up. So, and there was chalk, and there was slates. They used slates like the one out at Nippa. So that was different for us. But here's how we had our meals. In the morning, all of us would have cereal, oatmeal, that's what we grew up on. But at noon, we'd go next door to the Hill House and have dinner. You don't have lunch, you have dinner. Because the farmers and the fishermen who got back from fishing and their net pulling, they wanted dinner. Then at night you went over and you had supper. And that was the routine that we went through. So that was my time at Santa Ana when I was that young. Now, oh, by the way, the beds were comfortable. Oh, yeah. I had to make a note of that here. Now, with those cabins, there was a lodge. The lodge would have been about half the size of this room. And in that lodge, at one end was remember when you have these camp stoves where you pumped up the white gas? That was the stove, was that type of stove. And it had an oven, the whole works, just like the old days. They were a little dangerous, I guess, I didn't know that. But that's how they would heat water and the other things. And then we also, as I said, drank from the lake, from the schoolhouse, and 3 days a week. This is another thing that I'll never forget. The fishing was still good in the 30s, and Booth Fishery in Bayfield they had 3 different boats over the years, but the last one they had was the Apostle Islands. And maybe some of you have seen pictures of that boat, but it would go around to the fish camps and pick up the fish. And when they came into the Hill dock, now the Hill dock was right next to us, that was a big dock. He had what they call a fish house on the dock where they used to keep the nets, keep the fish. And then when that boat came in, the boat would pick up the fish from the 3 days a week now that came in. So the fish aren't older than 2 days. They're all on ice because all those fishermen over there had ice houses. And the story of how they got ice into the ice house is a story of a different day. Okay. But anyway, they would chip that ice and they would pack the fish in the ice. And at the time, it was whitefish and trout. Of course, in the fall, it was herring. Herring was a big thing. And these boats would come into Booth fisheries with herring, actually almost filling the boat, almost sinking the boat, getting it. And they had people from town that would process. My sister was going with her future husband, who was a son of a fisherman on Santa Ana, and she'd come back for school, or from where she was working in Duluth, help pack herring. And herring was shipped out in kegs or barrels, and they had cooperages, one over in Bayfield, one actually at one time here on the island. So that takes me to my early years on sand. Then the war comes along, no one's coming up for vacation. Then after the war, in 47, now I'm in high school, I get a job with Mr. Anderson of Anderson Windows, and he has his place on Santa Ana. Well, someone has to help him open up in the spring, and actually I didn't close down. Bert Hill was still around, and he was really the watchman and the caretaker. But I'd come up with them, and he had a 1938 Packard, 9-passenger. We had that thing loaded. Mrs. Anderson and I would come up. Mr. Anderson's still working. So that was our introduction in the spring. I'm scrubbing floors. I'm doing everything that a young boy should do to help out with the early spring. That also was a time when Mary Rice, you all know that name, you all, and some of you know her, knew her. Her father and mother, her mother was an Anderson who married Bill Hewings. They bought the Hill Shaw corner about 44, because Bert Hill left the island during the war. and they turned that into their cabin and what have you. Well, my sister got a job taking care of Mary that night,
Oh, which,
and her sister Martha. So she spent the whole summer on Santa Ana, and we had a lot of good pictures of that, but we don't have them anymore. I don't know, maybe my sister has them. But anyway, that's where she met her husband-to-be. He was the oldest son of Carl Dahl. Now, Carl Dahl was one of the, I guess maybe 7 or 8 fishing families on the island.
mm-hmm.
The population of San Island got up to 100 people in 1918. They had a school, they had a telephone system on the island. In fact, one year they laid a cable to the mainland, and the ice took it out in the spring. So they had 1 year of contact. The only other way you could contact someone on the island was to go to Little Sand Bay, where there was fishing families there. And when you look at that chart of Sand Island, you see that blue, low, shallow area. Well, Sand Bay, Little Sand Bay is over here, and that was a fishing complex. So if you drove up there to go to Sand Island, you hoped you'd catch a fisherman to take you over. And of course, you want to ride in a fishing boat, you know what it smells like. Anyway, right, I look at a smile over here. Phil, you know what they look like, don't they? Anyway, but on the island, Bert Hill ran the boat for Mr. Anderson. It's called the Mary. It was an old lifeboat, about 26 feet long. Steered it like that. And then later on, I was with Mr. Anderson when he bought a new boat. 1948, he bought a boat called, it's called the Admiral. It's still in Bayfield. It's still owned by the family. Mr. Anderson wouldn't buy anything but a wooden boat. I mean, you're making windows, you gotta have wood. So I'd spend about 4.5 years helping them out at San Juan. I wasn't in all summer. I'd come up in the spring, I'd come up sometime during the middle of the summer and do maintenance work. And I don't know how many of you know Warren Yench. He was part of the Yench family, and he really became the helper for the Hewlings, the Andersons, and his own family up there on the island. Let's see if we went to the lighthouse. Now, you've seen pictures of the Sand Island Light. It's the most unique lighthouse in the whole system. The stone that built that lighthouse is quarried right there. So they built that lighthouse back in 1881 or something like that, and they closed it in 1921. Just the lighthouse keeper out of there. Why? Because they built a tower next to that. The lighthouse service did, and now it becomes part of the Coast Guard. And on the top of that tower, they put a light that was lit with acetylene. Now, if some of you know what a guy that's got a acetylene torch, he's cutting into steel. Well, that gas can be produced in a cylinder that will pressurize itself by adding water to a calcium carbide or something like that. So they put these cylinders up on this tower, and actually in some of the lighthouses, and they'd have a pilot light next to it because they used solar. Believe it or not, back in 1921, there was a solar system that turned those lights on and off. What happened when the sun would come up, it would heat a rod, and that rod would pinch the pipe that fed the gas. When the sun went down, it cooled and opened up the gas again, and that little pilot light next to it would light the light. And those were used for many, many years in lighthouses all over the United States, I think the world. But that tower was there until they put the light now back into the lighthouse. And now most of those lights in the lighthouses are solar powered. But the time we went over there, I have a picture of it. I don't dare show it to people. We were in the lighthouse, and there's a hat on the wall that was a lighthouse keeper's hat. Now this would be like 1949, 50, and I took that hat off. Oh, Bill Hewlings had remodeled the lighthouse, because it was in disrepair. And he had a lease on it for, someone said 100 years, I don't know, but the Park Service canceled the lease. But anyway, here's this hat hanging on the wall. I put it on my head, and out behind the lighthouse is a brick outhouse. How many have been in a brick outhouse? You've heard that comment, yeah, it's built like a brick house. So I'm coming out of that outhouse, acting like I'm holding up my pants with Herb Lewick's hat on. Well, one day I'm down at the museum down here, and I see that hat hanging in right where the raspberry lens was. And I, gee, that looks like the hat I had on. Well, I didn't say anything to anyone. I came back 2 years later, and the hat's gone. So Steve was now down there. I said, Steve, would you have put that hat away somewhere? Because they had the vault and they have all this other place. No. So they started looking, couldn't find the hat. So there's one of those examples of where if you have a museum and you don't have things locked down or hooked up, they kind of disappear on you. So let's see, how did I end my time there? Well, Uncle Sam ended my time. So, and I've been back a couple of times since. And things have changed, of course, everywhere. But the people ask about why are there still people on Rocky and why are they still on sand? Well, when the Park Service came in, they gave people choices. You can either sell right now, and my sister and her husband sold their land on Sand Island because they thought it was a reasonable price. Or you can get a 25-year lease on the property, or you can get a life lease. Now, here's what some of these people did. In the Hewlings area, they took a newborn child and put the name of the lease in that person's name. And that person now is over 65 years old. So they're still, that's why they're still there. Because now the Park Service didn't like that. They really tried to say, hey, that was not our idea. We thought that we'd take the people who are there now. No. And they did the same thing with Rocky, with the Nelsons out at Rocky. That is also under a life lease. But some people took the 25-year lease. But all the places along the southern border of Sand Island are under life lease. Well, with that, any questions?
Yeah.